to learn and listen a little more about your experience in studies in ethnography. And I'm going to ask my friend, Dr. Carmen, to make the question that we are talking about it. Okay? And before we start, I want to thank you for your time to listen to us, to share with us this moment in the forum.
Right.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for coming.
Now, we are very thankful for your participation in your symposium. And we have 3 questions, but Vera has new students coming all the time. And she wondered if you could just give a small picture of what about ethnography, what's the difference between ethnography and other fields of research, just the basics. And I have one question, like, at the moment they are coming, there is many different types of research coming to educational field, and we kind of confused about what is it, what's the difference between ethnography and the other one. Many books call themselves, entitled like ethnomethodology, and that's basically using your stuff and Spindler and everyone that we read, and some others in historiography that also say the same thing, historioethnography or something. All this mix of measured subjects and ethnography. And we wonder what you think about that and how you, if we need to separate or not. Question. Okay. And there is another question. We're going to build all the questions together so that you can answer later. The other question is about how do you see the way ethnography is going in the future? Like, I can see 3 different fields. One is ethnography of classroom and microethnography, and using sociolinguistics and interaction in school and classroom. That's a major thing. Another one is teaching as teacher as a researcher. It seems to me that it's not quite the same. And the other one is more broad ethnography. They call it qualitative research. They use only interviews and participant observation, but they use surveys and stuff also. And I want to hear about that if we can. And the last one is how are you placed on all these different methodology and how it's, I don't know, how you feel about these things.
You ask each of them again, and I'll just try to say something about each of them.
Well, first is, what's the difference between ethnography and other types of research? That's the basic question. You may have answered that 1,000 times. Just do it again.
And is this particularly with the new students in mind?
Yes.
Well, it seems to me that ethnography uses many of the methods of, maybe all of the methods of more general qualitative research, but there are 2 things. Well, let's see. I guess I can't remember. I've said 2 or 3 or 4 things that I think characterizes ethnography as distinct from the others. I'll try to remember them. One is that there's the emphasis on meaning of the actions to the people doing the actions. That it seems to me if observational work doesn't do that, or narrative reporting doesn't do that, it's not ethnographic. But ethnography, some other kinds of qualitative research are also concerned with the meanings of actions from the point of view of other actors. I think what distinguishes ethnography is that it tries to look at a setting as a whole. And that setting might be a classroom, it might be a community with the school in it, or it might be a whole school. There are different sort of units of whole that ethnographers look at. But when they do so, they try to look at all of the people within that whole and all the roles of the people within that whole as they contribute to what everyone else is doing. Sometimes with qualitative research don't try to do that. So there's that emphasis on holism as a second feature. And then a third feature is that, and this is one of the things that I think really makes ethnography different from other forms of social research. But not everything that gets called ethnography does this. This is part of my definition of it. Ethnography always has a comparative perspective. It says not only what's happening here, what do the happenings mean to the people who are doing them, but how is what's going on here and what it means to people different from other ways of doing that somewhere else in the society or somewhere else in the world. So when one is looking in a particular place as an ethnographer, especially if it's an ethnographer with an anthropological or anthropology education background, you're thinking about other ways of doing the same scene, whether you're looking as a whole at a family or at a classroom or at a school in relation to its neighborhood. You're thinking about, in the United States, you're thinking about, here's an inner city school in its neighborhood. How is that different from a school in its neighborhood in the suburbs or in a rural area or in Germany or in Britain or in Japan or in Brazil, right? So there's always this comparative sense, and ethnographic description and the kinds of analysis that ethnographers do has always in the backdrop this sense that there's a wide range of humanly possible ways of doing the same kinds of things, family life or a classroom or teaching reading or relating between teachers and parents and so on. And so you are looking very closely as an ethnographer at a particular setting as a whole, and you're trying to see the meanings to the people and what they do. You're trying to be very specific about what they do. But if you're also being really ethnographic, you have this kind of comparative perspective. Not all. No, if we were to use those criteria for all the papers that get presented at the forum, we would flunk many of them.
That's
right?
true.
So I don't insist on a strict definition of ethnography as distinct from these other things, as we said in the session. But when I'm thinking about drawing distinctions, that's where I draw them. Okay? What's the next question?
Second question is about differentiation between all the types of studies in qualitative research. And we see name is ethnography, things like historiography, and mixed with life stories, and classroom. No, I'm sorry. That's also built into microethnography, but I don't know how I can differentiate it, all these different way of thinking and putting together in ethnography.
Okay, well let me say a few things about that. And again, since I don't know the Brazilian terms and what's particularly happening right now there, I may have sort of I may not respond adequately to what you asked, but a couple thoughts. One is that it is hard to distinguish because between what I call microethnography and ethnographic microanalysis and what some people call discourse analysis. There's kinds of discourse analysis in sociolinguistics or in interactional sociolinguistics, which is John Gumper's system. Now, there is also a kind of discourse analysis called critical discourse analysis in England, which is a little different. There's a good deal of overlap with that too, but that tends to have, grand level social theory about class relations or some other kind of theory about domination in society that very heavily drives the data collection and the analysis, and our work isn't quite so closely connected with broader social theory, but there always has been a connection, at least in my own work. I'm interested in issues of class and race and ethnicity and gender as they play out in the wider society and in the local society. It's just that I'm not quite in the same theoretical camp as all the people that label the work critical. I've been arguing, however, that there's a more critical edge to the kind of work that people like Ray McDermott and Bud Meehan and I and even John Gumpert do than is sometimes recognized by those people. But anyway, so that's another distinction. But anyway, the ethnographic microanalysis or microethnography and interactional sociolinguistics and some kinds of discourse analysis may well be sort of synonymous for all practical purposes. The ethno-historical methods and ethnomethodology are a different matter. I mean, that's a different kind of distinction. And I would say that a lot of contemporary anthropological ethnography, and even way back sometimes, often looked at some historical information, but it's relatively new to systematically try to do sort of recent history with ethnographic field methods. Now, you know, John Puckett on our faculty actually did that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you can call that ethnohistory, and you can also call it ethnography. If there's actual contemporary participant observation and interviewing, and the review of contemporary documents from a setting, combined with looking at documents from the past or interviewing people about the past or doing life history interviews of people whose lives you're also looking at as they're living them right now, so you're not just interviewing them about the past. I would call that ethnography with a time depth dimension, and you could call it ethnohistory. I'm not sure, what the examples are that you're seeing, but that's the way I would think about it. If it's really doing qualitative research to discover material about people's lives in the past, I would say that's more like, they're sometimes calling it recent history in the United States. That would be more historical than ethnographic. But if you're combining a study of everyday lives now with some time depth information, then I would think it's sort of like what we sometimes call ethnohistory here, or life history. And then ethnomethodology, that's a tougher one, because there's a possibility that the term is being used wrong. And it's just the ethno from ethnography and the ethno in ethnomethodology is sort of being mixed up together. And that maybe I should jump back actually, or at least let me just say that this applies to the answer to the first question as well as
Yes.
the term ethno and ethnography, as you know, because I've lectured about it in your presence, comes from the Greek word for other people, the ethnoi, the people who are not Greeks. And so ethnography literally means writing about other people. We now have domestic ethnography, and that's much of what we all have been doing. We're looking within our own society. And I say that we still have a bit of that sense of the relation to other people in our work. If we have this comparative perspective, while we're looking in our own society, we're saying, well, how is this different from the way the Japanese do it and the way people, in Mexico do it and the way people in the rural area do it if we're in the city and so on. That kind of comparative view is in the spirit of looking across a variety of groups ethnically. So that's what ethnoi or ethno means in ethnography. What ethno means in ethnomethodology is something quite different. I know this because I know the people who created the term, Harold Garfinkel and Aaron Cicero, were the people who really, it was Garfinkel who coined the term. And by that, he meant what the German kind of philosophical sociologist Alfred Schutz, or social psychologist, Alfred Schutz meant by this. They meant folk methods or members' methods of making sense in the world. They meant by that something like what Bourdieu means by the habitus, or we have an expression in American English, the view of the man in the street, right? It's kind of common sense understandings of the world by ordinary people when they're not being especially reflective, when they're just going about their business. That's what ethno means in ethnomethodology. And what the methodology part means is those ordinary people's ways of making common sense, even hegemonic common sense, but they didn't use the notion of hegemony. Garfinkel didn't. But it's ordinary, unreflective, common sense acting in the world, and they discovered that in order to do that, you have to presume certain things about the world. For example, in ordinary interaction, you have to assume that at some level, people are pretty much telling the truth. If you're a stockbroker, or an automobile salesman or something, then we don't assume that they're telling the truth. But if you go into a store and you say, how much does this bag of limes cost, or how much does this bottle of cachaça cost?
I can trust your
They say, no, but and they say whatever it is, you assume that they're not kidding, and that when you hand them the money, they will give you the change that they said they would, and that was one of the ethno methods that they discovered. I mean, they thought about what are these things we never think about as ways of making sense in the world, that are so part of our taken for granted understanding that we never even think about them. And actually Garfinkel created a bunch of experiments to test things like this. We can't ethically do things like this anymore, but he assigned his graduate students to do things like get on the bus, and you say, does this bus, go to Le Mans, right? you're in some part of Rio. You say, does this bus go to Copacabana? And the driver says yes, right, or no. And then, as the passenger, you say, in the next turn, you say, well, how can I know that? Right. He says, yeah, the bus goes to Copacabana. And you say, how can I know that? Right. And you can actually get the bus driver, if you persist in that, to pull the bus over, stop, call a policeman, you know, I mean, it brings everyday life completely to a standstill. It's like there's these sort of fundamental things we assume about life, and other things. Another example is you see someone lying in the street, in the middle of the street, and ethnomethodology said, this is the original sense of the term, that you need to construct a story about what happened in order to understand this. You have to say, oh, well, this is a man who is drunk, or someone who is a diabetic and had a diabetic coma, or someone who maybe had a heart attack or was hit by a car, or, you know. We don't just leave the percept there, person in the street. We always construct some kind of a story. And so when the teacher sees the school leaver who comes back, that she decides she can't help. The reason she decides that is she has a little story assumption about this is a person that's not going to be worth my time. Okay? So the ethnomethodology, really, strictly speaking, was the study of that sort of thing. Now, conversation analysis is a kind of microanalysis that's similar to discourse analysis that came out of ethnomethodology. And some of the confusion may be because there's kinds of ethnomethodologies that are conversation analysis, and then that looks like what I call microethnography. But strictly speaking, ethnomethodology was the study of these ordinary common sense understandings in the world as people live the world, and it comes from continental, partly phenomenological philosophy, and also and as that informed American social scientists, particularly original sociologists. And I mean, there's some other things about it that we won't go into. But at any rate, there's one of the sources down there, Schitt's, the phenomenology of the social world and sets of collective papers. I've been very influenced by ethnomethodology, but I don't think that my work is ethnomethodological. There's an emphasis. The other thing that's distinctive about ethnomethodology is distinct from anthropology. Is there's an emphasis on people making their sense as they go along. So the notion of culturally learned patterns of sense-making, or the use of language in the way linguistic learning shapes what we do, seems that the stories that are being made up and the sense that's being made up is made up completely in the situation. So again, there's no connection between social class or race or any of those things and the sense making. And both anthropology and critical theory are much more into making broader connections as influences on what people are doing in the local scene. The ethnomethodologists, for some reason, we don't have time to review, but for social theory reasons, said, let's just, that's been overdone, let's bracket that, let's just try to look at people making sense in the immediate scene. And then they kind of forgot about, theoretically, the wider society. But again, I don't know which ethnomethodology, you know,
It looks like exactly the same.
This is useful to something. It seems to me that
And if I want to interview the principal about a wide variety of topics, I can do that. But maybe the teacher can't because of the local boss. There's all kinds of ways in which I can't get as close to some aspects of the subjective world of the teacher because of those, because I don't live within those constraints. It's both a disadvantage to me as a participant observer who's only participating a little, really, as against being an observant participant. There's some real disadvantages to not having those weights and constraints if I'm trying to describe people acting and making sense within a world of weights and constraints. But there's also some advantages to being able to interview the principal about some things that the teacher can't, and noticing some things about the back of the room that the teacher can't, and so on. And similarly, on the teacher research side, there's advantages of the depth of immersion and sense of the weight of one's action and the institutional weight on one that it's harder for an external observer to get, but there's also the problem of tunnel vision and, you know, taking for granted too much about one's own practice and not seeing certain things from inside. So the insider has the problem of short-sightedness and tunnel vision, and the outsider researcher has lots of breadth of view, but you sacrifice some of this sense of the weight of practice, right? So I think that actually we will always need both. I'm very supportive of teacher research, but I don't think it can get at everything. And I'm very supportive of regular qualitative research, but it has some real limitations that up until fairly recently people weren't as aware of, or at least publicly acknowledging. And there was a kind of elitist tendency, especially in the generation before me, both in anthropology and other kinds of qualitative research, that people, you know, never even thought about having to engage in the work as a way of understanding it, right? They would watch the making of a canoe. They would never try to make a canoe along with people. Mm-hmm. And I actually wrote about that in 1978. I published, or I gave an address to my past presidential address to the Council on Anthropology of Education was about that issue, and I used Malinowski's image of watching the people make the canoe, and I said in educational research there's something you can only get by picking up the log with the other workers, and so I was advocating for more participation in work by outsider researchers and also encouraging teacher research way back then. But I don't really think it tends to be kind of a dichotomization of saying, well, teacher research is the only virtuous and valid way to get knowledge, and this other stuff is elitist and misleading and whatnot, and or vice versa. Only an outsider can understand. The teacher is too immersed in practice and can't be reflective enough and can't get enough wide-ranging information. And I think both of those positions don't make sense. I think there are strengths and limitations in both kinds of.
That's why it's collaborative research.
Yeah, ideally maybe are the true collaborative projects, but they're very hard to do because the power relationships are never equal, and you know. Yeah. Anyway, that's. Yeah.
Just to finish, and how do you feel like, you know, how it goes to the future? You know, ethnography and education. It's really necessary to make all this difference or distinction between one method to the other and the way to go. We need to do better.
I think we should do good work and I'm not worried about the labels. But I do think that a good deal of what's getting called ethnography suffers from not having enough of a comparative perspective.
Okay.
I do think that is a distinct advantage of what was classically called ethnography. And I don't care whether the term gets lost. I do care that the comparative perspective isn't present in a lot of work now. And I think that's intellectually a loss. I think you can do more powerful analysis when you realize that there are other ways that this thing you're seeing might be done. And also in educational work, that comparative view can be an inspiration for creativity, because if you realize that what you're seeing is not the only way or the essential way, you know, it helps us not naturalize and essentialize what we're seeing if we know that somewhere else they don't do it this way and it works just fine. So it's
the new word, essentialize is a new word. I never heard that.
Oh, that's now very trendy here. We're saying we shouldn't essentialize culture. We shouldn't essentialize race. We shouldn't.
Essentialize.
So, or naturalize, to think that this is inherently the way things are. And so that comparative perspective is a corrective against that kind of essentializing. And that, I think, if you lose that, you weaken both the analytic capacity of the scholarship, but you also risk a narrowing of imagination of new possibilities for practice. See, because if I know this is only one among many possible ways of teaching reading that people have used in human experience, then I can say, well, gee, maybe we might play with this a little and try to do something different, and know that I'm not, you know, messing with the pillars that hold up the universe. You see, there's a tendency for educational practitioners, at least in this country, to be so true believers about, you know, their own, that they don't realize that it's all kind of relative. And yeah. So anyway, that's.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
It's very good.
Good.
Can you see in Brazil?
They want us to know when you're going to Brazil again.
Yes. Well, I'd like to come again. And the way now my schedule is, it's not going to be possible next summer. And the earliest it would possibly be would be the summer after next. And it could even be that it would have to wait another year. But I would think that the summer after next might be possible. And another possibility might be, you know, but it would have to be a shorter trip. I might be able to carve out 3 weeks in our winter, or
December. I don't think you can handle the summertime in Brazil. It's getting harder than
well, maybe, maybe not. But I mean, that might be another alternative.
But summer for
But that would have to be a shorter amount of time.
It's vacation for us.
Yeah.